folks, welcome back to another Besides and On podcast. My name is Scuba. We've got Monk at the other side of the table. How are you doing, my friend?
It's election month. I'm super happy because I'm always excited about politics. Woo, politics.
That's a great start for you. That's good. So we have on the line right now Scott Rutherford from the Scottish Greens. This is, of course, episode 4. How are we doing, Scott?
Aye, very good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Awesome, man. Not a problem.
You're the first Green member we've had. Not
ever.
Through choice. We did try and get Mark Roscoe, and we tried to get Ian Morris, and Mark Roscoe got back to us a bit too late and missed it, and we couldn't hear back from Ian. So
was that the first one we ever done? The first election
thing we tried to get Mark Roscoe. Yeah.
Right. Aye.
Which would have been great because he's an MSP now. So it would have been our first MSP.
Lad.
Well, this time. Hopefully this time.
That's it. We'll see how it goes.
I mean, maybe me. Well, I'm fifth on the list, so we'll see.
Yeah, you never know. Stranger things have happened.
I mean, we might get 40% of the vote.
Yeah,
I'm open to that.
There you go. That's positive thinking. I like that.
It's always great to go in with positive thinking. Unlike you,
slight delusion, Jake, but also positive thinking.
There you go. Excellent. So we've got you on to sort of chat about the election, the upcoming election, and a bit about your childhood, a bit about your backstory, about what got you into politics and stuff like that. So if we start maybe by talking a bit about your childhood, how was your childhood, Scott? Was it exciting?
My childhood, I think fairly standard. I was born and brought up in Kirkcaldy. Lived there for most of my life. I think it was fairly sort of standard. I growing up in Kirkcaldy in the 90s was a fairly happy place. There was a lot of parks to play in, and that's what I had 2 younger brothers, so that's what we spent a lot of time doing. Running about outside, playing soldiers.
And you've got some quite built up for forestry-based areas as well. Like even Ravenscraig Park is for instance, Beveridge Park as well is one of the biggest, most well-known sort of built-up areas for to go and play about in. There's not much else like that in smaller towns and stuff like that. It's quite interesting.
Aye. Well, we used to live in Temple Hall for the first, I don't know, maybe 6 years of my life. And there's no really a lot of green spaces around there necessarily. So the Beveridge Park when I was younger was the sort of it was like a day out almost. You had ice cream, you had swings, you had like a pond. I even think when I was wee. Now I'm not sure if I've just seen pictures and I'm kind of imagining this. I do think this is a genuine memory. There used to be an open swimming pool. So it was like this, big ceramic, sort of ceramic pool they had that during the summer was filled with ice cold water, and then the autumn and the rest of the year actually it was just filled with leaves. So I think I can vaguely remember that as well. It was, a great day out. I used to love the Beveridge Park.
Do you remember that? I remember that in Leven.
There was something similar in Leven that was switched to a skate park eventually. But again, we were in Kirkcaldy now and again sort of thing. It was
but the same in Kennedy, we had Leven and Glenrothes, they were closer. So Kirkcaldy was that was like going to Edinburgh. A
special day out, innit?
That was a big day out for us.
Did you have your special shirt, that you put on when you came to Kirkcaldy?
Yep.
Sunday best.
Your Sunday vest and that, yep.
Amazing. So your childhood was okay, and so did you find it how close? Sorry, I'm going to start again. This is the only bit I'm going to edit. What eventually developed from then for you getting into politics?
Well, I think like most people, I grew up in a fairly apolitical household. I think it's easy being so involved in politics now to think that everyone shares my enthusiasm, that everyone, is looking at results from council by-elections of years gone by and that. And ultimately, politics, I don't think is much, if at all, an ongoing discussion in most households throughout the year. I think when there's elections on, obviously, the focus is kind of sharpened, and then, it just, it's on the TV every night, it becomes really part of the public psyche, and there is more discussion. But when I was growing up, I don't know anyone that was in politics. I never thought about politics. My dad was a carpet fitter. My mum was a cleaner growing up, and looking after us full time. So there wasn't an uncle that got me into it or anything. And then I remember being in high school and thinking, when you're educated a little bit in modern studies and you maybe start to think about politics, and certainly when you're sort of in your adolescence, you're sort of shaping your own moral code. You're sort of having values embedded in you in a very sort of new way. And I guess some politics does filter into that in some way. I remember feeling really vehemently anti-Tory, like most people in Gregory, really vehemently anti-Tory, even in my sort of early teenage years, because I couldn't have told you one policy they had, but I knew firmly from that old it's like a childhood rhyme about Maggie Thatcher, the milk snatcher, or it's a headline or something. Like that was in my head, and the very prospect that someone who was a leader of a country, who was able to change people's lives, right? That would be like a priority of theirs, that they would take milk away from kids in primary school. That was always I was brought up with that lodged in my head. And of course, I knew the Tories were definitely not representative of anything about our lives. We were just normal working class family, and I knew that the Tories represented a very different side to the country. It would be affluent, it would be selfish. That was my perception as an adolescent, and be fair to say, I still fairly buy into that perception. I think that's pretty fair. I eventually got into politics, like so many, because of the independence referendum.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was that catalyst. It was like a conversation starter for folk growing up.
This is, I think that was a beginning for you as well. To be fair,
we started with conspiracy theories.
We were one of these. Well, two of these people.
We got into real politics during the independence referendum.
And you know what? There was a huge difference.
Started off as a anti-independence guy in 2013.
Because I was, again, I don't know about your reasoning, but I was off it doesn't matter. Politics doesn't matter. F the government, who cares?
Kind of that, but it was also this is stupid, we're too wee. It was literally a too wee, there's no point in us even trying.
Right.
And also, nobody's going to vote for it, so there's no point. There was that stupid argument as well. But that went away pretty quickly. As soon as I started reading into it, it went away very, very quickly.
And that was the great thing about the independence referendum, was getting people engaging. And you know what? Did we speak about this openly on the podcast the last time? With Ryan? The idea that like mandatory voting could actually get people engaging a wee bit, at least put like a test idea for that. Did we speak about that openly? No, that's cool. We might do that in a wee while, because I thought it would be interesting. So, but I say, so you grew from there. So what happened? Were you an SNP guy? Like, what happened? Like,
was it straight into the Greens?
What was that, sorry, Craig?
Was it straight into the Greens, or was it SNP first and then?
Well, actually, so I voted for 3 different parties throughout my life. The very first time I could vote, I think, and I can't definitively say it was this election, but I remember being in the ballot box. I remember being taken by a family friend around the corner who was like, "Yeah, you've got to vote. This is like, you if you want to have any say over your future, you have to." You have to decide who's going to make the laws. Yeah. So I remember doing it and it being like a really empowering process. And we went around the corner and I voted for Labour. And I think it was maybe the 2011 Holyrood election or the local elections. I had thought it was 2010. But then I looked recently, and my birthday's in June, and the 2010 election was in May, I think. So I don't think I would have been 18 at the time. I don't think I would have been able to vote. But the first time I went Labour. Then 2015, which is obviously a year after the independence referendum. At this point, there's a coalition government between the Tories and the Lib Dems, and it looks like Labour could be in with a sort of shout. The SNP are running this really empowering anti-austerity campaign that there's a real buzz about. There's a real excitement, like post-independence, that I don't know. We can still sort of carry on, and we can still forge ahead a kind of brighter future, even though it's not within the context of being an independent country, but at least possibly changing the one we're in. And then of course, the 2014, I was aware of the Greens, and that's when I became I don't know, kind of interested in them. I certainly felt like a bit of a pull to them. They didn't say anything I could actually disagree with, but it's one of those things where it's like they don't get a lot of media attention.
Yeah.
They're not they only had 2 MSPs at the time, so it wasn't a great deal of promotion. They didn't in 2015. I think they stood about 38 or so candidates in Scotland. So Kirkcaldy, I couldn't vote for them, but I would have if I had had choice in 2015 at the general election. And then I think not long after that, or maybe just around that time, I had just gotten a full-time job, after being on the dole and sort of in and out of work at places like Amazon for a while. And so, I became a full-time carer at a care home in Oxford, and with that first paycheck, I was like, I'm going to join the Greens. The membership was only about £2 a month, but I just thought, like, I'm not going to join anyone until I have money in my pocket, So I did that with my first paycheck, joined the Greens, and then in the sort of the run-up from 2015 to 2016 and the Holyrood election, it was one of those strange things where I became involved, and I was like, yeah, I really like the Greens, I'm joining them. And then you get some emails like, oh, we want a leaflet round your way, can you help us out? And I sort of felt, well, yeah, I like the Greens, I want to see them get more MSPs elected, so yeah, I'm sure I would deliver some leaflets. And then it's like, oh, we need someone to stand for this at branch level. And is anyone interested in in being a candidate for the local elections in 2017? And it's one of those things where it almost is like a snowballing effect. I think once you join a political party and you're passionate about their message, you get involved, and then there's always something else to do. And if you find yourself going, I want to see this done, and maybe I kind of have to be a bit of a driving force behind it to get it done, then things snowball, and you become more and more involved. And eventually, like me, you end up becoming a Westminster candidate because either no one else will do it, or you're like, yeah, actually, I really care about about where I'm from, and I'm really proud to be a Green, and I want to see ultimately a Green governments across the UK or in an independent Scotland. So I'm going to do my best to give people that opportunity to do so, and that's kind of how I became involved in the Greens, and eventually ended up doing all these different things within the party.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So the Greens have always sort of struck me as a bit broad church, because I've met people in the Greens who could be considered sort of centrist, liberal types, all the way to sort of communists. Where would you see yourself in that area? Would you consider yourself to the left or to the right?
To be honest, I don't really think we do have much of a centre or a right. Maybe folk you've met, that's your experience. But
no, I just mean
I think we're all
in comparison to the more left of the party. I don't mean anybody's right wing.
Right. Good. I don't know where I consider myself. I consider myself, I guess, just a part of the party, and I consider the party socialist. So.
Right,
okay. I mean, I suppose I probably wouldn't say, oh, I am a socialist, I am a Green. I just kind of say, yeah, I'm a member of the Greens, and maybe feel that's implied. Certainly more left-wing than, any of the parties that are social democratic in their DNA, like Labour and that sort of thing. I did actually think about joining the SSP before. So after 2014, I was like, I need to get more involved in politics. I think I need to do more than just vote. I want to see the most, left-wing policies possible enacted. So I remember thinking, like, the SSP are kind of good, the Greens are kind of good, and then there was that weird process of like weighing stuff up. And I think when political parties put together their literature and their websites and stuff, they probably don't think, oh, much people are going to look at this and it's not really going to change minds. But they do it anyway because it's good to have a public presence, and appear organised. I remember looking at the SSP's website and thinking, like, this is there's no organisation here. I remember thinking, like, this colour scheme is kind of sore my eyes and stuff, and then looking at the Greens one thinking, okay, that's better. It was one of those, like, small, like, sort of wink indicators, like, okay, they've kind of got their act together, and they've got 2 MSPs, but maybe, it looks like they can get, like, 6 or 7 of this election. It's like, I think I'm gonna go for them, and that's kind of how I became more involved. Like, and the SSP had some nice policies and stuff. I remember seeing them regularly campaign for things like it was either a living wage or it was a £10 an hour minimum wage.
Yeah.
Seeing them doing street stalls like that in Edinburgh, and like, okay, like, that's great, absolutely all for that. But in the context of like Holyrood election, where everyone agrees with that, but you can't change it because there isn't the power over wages in the private sector. Like, the Greens seem that really nice intersection of like socialist, left wing, but also maybe pragmatic as an opposition, which I think they proved to be over this session of Holyrood.
Yeah, I think the Greens have got some hate though from some of the independence movement because of their opposition. Have you seen some of that online?
Their opposition to what?
Things like, I think it was the Glasgow Provost. The Greens voted against the SNP one. There was a lot of hate for that. And the GRA is a big thing now. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think on the Glasgow Provost side, which must have been just after the sort of local elections in 2017, I think. I remember being on a train coming back from something. It had a Vote Green badge on at the time, and there was this guy sitting opposite me. It was one of those, there's like a table and there's 4 chairs around it. He's on the other side. I can see him a few times, the Green catches his eye. Eventually, I guess he plucks up the courage and says, you remember that Green Party? I was like, yeah. And he starts asking me, like, what's this issue about in Glasgow Council about, the Greens aren't supporting the SNP or stuff. And I thought we're all part of one movement. And it was one of those things where, like, I think online it can appear quite heated. Social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they don't promote and they don't allow for like a casual, nice conversation. People want to win arguments, and often language is bombastic. So I think, like, within the context of that, arguments can look quite heated. But the Glasgow Provost thing was about the Green Party, who have I think it's like 10 councillors in Glasgow Council. Like a sizable chunk of people elected. They have about 10 councillors, and the SNP expected, as far as I'm aware, like just kind of unbridled support for decisions on who gets roles within the council. And like, just because you're the slightly biggest party, I don't think you get to tell other parties to put you in all the positions of power. I have no idea really what came of the whole Provost thing, because I just didn't find it important. But it was just like it was an example, at least to me. I don't know how the public perceive these sort of things. They have things like that on the radar, but it seemed to me like, we get treated as this kind of like younger brother who's just expected to go along with the SNP's sort of whims and demands. And the reality is, like, politics needn't be heavily oppositional, but there is opposition. There can be constructive opposition like what we offer, or there can just be the chaos of so many other oppositional sort of politics, like what we see in Westminster. I think what the Greens offer is really constructive, and no, we're not going to nod through everything the SNP want because it's their policy and they're pro-independence. They have more MSPs. Like, we have a really distinctive position on a lot of policies. We're more left-wing than they are. The ecological crisis is massively central to our policy platform. And yeah, you know what? Like, we're not just going to just go for what the SNP want. In terms of the GRA debate, which I think was a bill that would have actually been voted on this session, or certainly brought to the chamber in this session if COVID hadn't hit. We would have seen, those fractures within the SNP between, as much as everyone's pro-yes, there's actually quite big factions of economic, factions across the economic left-right spectrum and factions across the social, conservative, liberal spectrum
And for those that find themselves on the kind of social conservative wing of the party, many are unhappy with the GRA, which, for gender reform and how that's enacted. I mean, they're against that. They will use lines like women's sex-based rights and believe that trans people are innately a threat to women and women's spaces, which I think is ridiculous, obviously. But yeah, there are those big differences, between us and other parties like the SNP. And in terms of our own sort of party, I don't really think there is much division. Our policy is decided, policy forums. When there are Green Party conferences 4 times a year, we all decide on the way the party moves, on the policy it will enact at Holyrood, and it's up to the MSPs to implement that. So yeah, it feels like a very united party. I mean, there's always going to be people who disagree about how things are done. When Scotland becomes independent, I hope it's a when, not an if. There's going to be lots of debate about where the party go on certain issues.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's good. That's to be welcomed, and I think we're a pretty united front in terms of how we're perceived and how we are in Scottish politics.
But this is why I don't understand when people argue against things based on it being quote unquote divisive. It's politics. Everything's divisive in a way. So for instance, I'm on the economic left spectrum when it comes to political parties, but unfortunately the economic left faction of the indie movement also tends to be what you describe as the social conservative when they're against the GRA, whereas I don't see an issue with the GRA change. So I consider myself to be on the economic left and on the social left. So there's a division there. And I'm kind of stuck on this side where I'm like, I agree with you on all these things, but then there's just this one wee thing that you say that I keep thinking, no, that's a bit shitty. And so I'm kind of just stuck there. Whereas you seem to be quite happy and you seem to be sort of sticking together as a group. And I think that's much more productive.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are a smaller party, than the SNP and stuff. We have, I think it's about 78,000 members, as opposed to the 100,000 plus the SNP have. So there's a lot less people to disagree with. But I think the kind of people who join the Greens, in my experience, they tend to be that the very sort of liberal left wing people, and that ultimately the ecology, liberty, left-wing politics, equalities across the spectrum tends to be at the forefront of their minds. For all Green Party members, and certainly for all elected Green Party politicians, these things are central. You're not going to join the Green Party if you aren't aligned with those things and those values.
Yeah.
Whereas, there is, you're right. I mean, within the SNP, there's still people you could point to now and say, well, they're tartan Tories, and in the past, that's certainly a lot more true. With such a big party and with so many, people, members and politicians elected across the country, there are fairly big schisms across the party. And I think they've managed to remain pretty united over the last sort of 10 years or so. But when it comes to things like the GRA, when it comes to a potential independent Scotland in the future, those gaps are going to become, at least as far as I'm concerned, they're going to become too big to bridge. The economic left and economic right, you can't find a happy medium for those policies. Yeah. the in-between for those is, some kind of flabby centrism that doesn't really appeal to anyone.
That's why the Lib Dems feel so much.
Appeal to the electorate in Scotland, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
What's that, sorry?
That's why the Lib Dems feel so much, I said.
Yeah. The Lib Dems are an interesting one. I don't know if you've seen any of their election literature so far, but they had this great phrase on a leaflet I got. It was, I think, Lib Dems, the Partnership for Recovery. I remember reading this and thinking, it doesn't tell you anywhere in the leaflet about what the partnership is, if it's, like who the people are that are in the partnership and how they're going to recover from this pandemic. It's just one of those bland phrases. It's like, it suggests teamwork and it suggests things getting better.
Yeah.
And without actually, any substantive policy. And I think that's kind of the Lib Dems encapsulated, So it's a nice phrase with absolutely nothing to back it up.
Well, that's sort of started to annoy me in a lot of elections, is that things are being said without explaining what they mean. So, like, the latest thing I saw was the SNP's policy of every play park being renewed. What does renewed mean? Does that mean taken out and new things put in?
Or
does
fresh
that mean
lick of paint?
A fresh lick of paint. Oh, tell me what renewed means. I want to know what the actual policy is. I don't want just a word, because they're being very specific with that word. And I think they're being very specific for a reason, and it's a worrying reason. So they're starting to annoy me in political leaflets. So I hope the Greens are more like out with it. They're just like, that's what we're doing.
Is there literature out for this election?
I haven't seen any yet. Is the Green literature out yet?
There's obviously it depends on your region, because they will be doing different. Like each local branch is going to do their own form of newsletters and leaflets and stuff.
Right.
But of course it depends how quickly branches and teams can get it out and stuff. But the free post, which goes to every house in the country, the free post goes out over the next sort of 2 weeks or so, and that's quite a sort of colourful, not too policy heavy, but substantive with the policy stuff it does include.
So you say stuff then? You don't just say renew?
Yeah, well, I really hope that this doesn't come back to haunt me. I've no idea what's going to be on the Mid Scotland and Fife leaf off the top of my head. I really hope we don't use the word renew anything, unless it's something really specific, like we will not renew Trident.
Yeah. Well, you could put renew and then just put in a description in in brackets.
Just put possibly somewhere.
Yeah. No possibilities, no maybes, no partnership for recovery. Just hopefully, well, I say hopefully. Pretty straight talking.
Yeah.
Pretty straight talking policy points.
So my thing about the Lib Dems, to go back to the Lib Dems, is I think...
Are we allowed to do this? Have the Lib Dems on and then talk about them afterwards, aye?
No, this is a compliment.
All right, okay, oh, shit.
I'm you know me, I'm quite obviously on the left. I try my best to be non-biased, just in these political interview things with the candidates. But right. I'm on the left, and so I obviously don't agree with the economic policies of the Lib Dems. But I feel like their science policies are some of the best. Although I haven't seen their science policies for this election, but in previous elections, they seem to be the best on science. Labour tend to focus on infrastructure, as bad as it is sometimes. That's what they focus on. Tories tend to vote on, I don't know, sucking money, corporate cock or whatever. And the Lib Dems tend to focus on science, and mental health is their go-to thing. So I've always never liked them economically, but their science policies tend to be top-notch, I think.
Well, I'm not really sure of a lot of what's in the sort of what's going to be in the Lib Dem manifesto. So in terms of their science of that, I'm not sure. But yeah, on mental health, they're not wrong. I think we announced it was about 2 or 3 days ago plans to bring mental health spending up to 10% of the overall NHS budget, over the next 2 years, and that would be within the context of needing a much wider NHS budget, as we begin to recover, the pandemic, and there's still going to be a huge amount of health needs that need to be addressed, that have certainly built up over the course of the pandemic. So yeah, those are massive things. Mental health is one of it's such a big issue. I mean, you can't really overstate its importance. I think the conversations about it in the society have been really interesting over the last years. I feel like there is a kind of more of a space now to talk about mental health. In terms of the wider health, people aren't afraid to talk about it on social media like they used to be. I've seen friends and stuff reach out for help, when they're struggling with their mental health over recent years in a way that I couldn't have imagined before. I think there's a softening about what masculinity is. And this is just sort of from a context of me and, anecdotally people I know. There's a softening of the sort of the masculinity, I think, in Scottish society now that allows people to say, do you know what, I'm working myself to death here. I'm struggling in my social life. Things just feel a bit too much. and like, yeah, you do your bit as a friend, as family members and stuff, but there needs to be policy responses to these things. You know, people need to have spaces to talk to others, to share their experience, to get things off their chest, and to get help. You know, if their needs are much more than that. Like, so important, so important. Yeah, the Lib Dems are definitely not wrong on that, and I think all the other parties are moving. They're moving a bit to the left on that issue as well. You know, mental health is so big, so important. You can't ignore it within the context of like a health discussion now. I don't think.
No. I think the big issue in Mid Scotland and Fife specifically is because it's rural. There doesn't seem to be a lot of talking therapy available. So if you go in with something like, so I went in 2018, I think. It was just after my mum died, and I went in with a panic attack thing, and it was instantly just pills, and I was like,
straight away.
I've had pills before. The pills didn't really work. What I need is some sort of talking therapy to help me through it and help me cope with it in a different way, and it's just impossible to receive anything like that. I think it might be because there's not a lot of therapists in this area, but it might also be something that could be done with policies. I don't know, but it just seems to be that, like, in Edinburgh, it's much easier to get some sort of therapy for free, and in Fife, it's just pills. It's just pills all the time. There needs to be something done there. I think.
Well, I think you're right. I think like Fife is that bit more rural. People are less concentrated, so if you get some good services up and running, they're not necessarily going to be available to the sort of wider region.
Yeah.
And you know, part of the policy that the policy needs to address this is things like staff retention in the NHS, you know, and in the public sector more widely. Like over the last 10 years, you know, inflation's massively outpaced the paltry wage increases that have been proposed, you know. So what healthcare professionals were getting 10 years ago is percentage-wise so much more than they're getting now. Even the wages have gone up, just not keeping up with inflation. And, you know, you can't expect to hold on to staff if they're not being compensated fairly. And yeah, I think another issue about, you know, when people struggle with mental health, that sort of, I guess it's almost like a kind of stereotypical response that you're just scared to hear about, you know, that people are just pushed pills and that, you know, take this medication, that'll deal with your problems, as opposed to the much tougher need to actually like address the issues themselves, you know. And like that's different for every individual, and that's really hard to do, but it's something we have to do. I think suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45 now. I'm not absolutely sure on sort of the age statistics there, but I think right. For men under 45, and that's terrifying. If that was anything else that we could prevent with healthcare, right? Anything else that was obvious, like, you know, if people's I don't know, legs were falling off, we would come up with a response. We'd go, this needs to be addressed. But because it's psychological, because it involves a deal of compassion at the policy level before you can even address it, right? It gets pushed to the side. It's an absolute crisis that's taking place right now, and you know what? Like we all, you know, we're all victims of losing a family member to that. Like the whole society is worse off for losing people, and it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Heartbreaking to see people, you know, take that as a last resort. But if there's not like appropriate mental health services, that will just continue to happen. You know, reinforces the need for a lot more increased funding for it.
Definitely. I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned you've done caring for a while.
Yeah.
Are you still doing that now?
No, I'm not doing it. I work in Holyrood now as a researcher.
Okay.
But but I was a carer from, when was it? Was it 2014 or 2015 up until 2019 or 2020, I think. It was my sort of, it was like the first full-time job I had, you know, and it was, I guess when people talk about like their professions, their vocations, that was really mine in my sort of early to mid-20s. And it was, you know, it's a really good job, but really hard job as well at times.
It would have been extra hard now.
Well, that was part of my question, like, caring bad enough, like really bad enough to sort of like to be able to do that work, you really need to have a strong stomach and just a strong personal will a lot of the time, especially during COVID. Like, just an absolute insane level of will you have to go through for that. So, much respect to you for taking that job, man.
Oh, that's very kind. I got a carer job. Initially, I was just I was unemployed for I think like just over a year, and I was really struggling to get any sort of form of work. Back then, I imagine it's still the case now. You would get things where you will go on like unpaid work trials and stuff, and that's like part of your dole that you get this experience. And I kind of just wandered into that with care. I had to do this kind of job seekers. You do a bit of work for this company, you do some training, then you might get a job at the end of it. So I did about 3 weeks worth of like actual like sort of it wasn't like full care work. It was you're starting the ground level, just getting some sort of basic skills, and then like a week of theory. And then luckily enough, I got offered a job on the back of it. Which felt massive at the time. And then I was a carer for a few years before going back to university. And then I kept doing care work on the side of that. And you know what? It was a saving grace for me. For just having a form of employment again. But then it's one of those things that when I was doing in my early 20s, you just I think you grow a lot as a person and you realise more about yourself. Like if you're looking after a bunch of old people who really need your help, you've got to be mature. You've got to be mature to their responses. Respond to their needs. And sort of just accept that like families are putting their loved ones in your hands. And you've got to be there for them. You've got to go above and beyond sometimes, and it's really, it feels really good to be able to do that sometimes, to be able to like see, see wee Peggy at the end of the day happy because because you've had a chat with her and you've looked at some old photographs and you're having a nice day and she feels valued, and that's really nice to do. It's a hard job as well, and I think for carers that are doing that now, my heart goes out to them having to do this, having to do care work during a pandemic when if you go out to the shops and you've touched a few things without thinking about it, and you somehow got coronavirus and you take this into a care home, like the responsibility on your shoulders to do that must be so stressful. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. What's he doing now as well? I think you said, was it researcher for Holyrood?
Yeah, I'm a researcher for one of our MSPs in Holyrood now.
Okay, so could you guide us through like what you'd be researching, what kind of things you'd be doing?
Yeah, so the MSP I work for, they are a member on the Finance and Constitution Committee. So that involves basically every week, not now because the Parliament's in recess, but every week you would have the committee meet. You would have so many papers submitted for the committee meeting beforehand, and the members are going to discuss and potentially vote on anything that the committee has decided will be part of its remit that week. So that's an aspect of the research you would do. You would look at papers, for example, about the budget, and identify areas, from a political perspective. Maybe you'd identify areas that are being cut, that are being altered, and what the implications are for decisions made in Westminster about the Scottish block grant this year. You would do stuff like that, but then beyond that, there's plenty of the sort of, just the admin of any job. Being a researcher isn't just exclusive to doing research. You're responding to constituents who need help, with casework. Maybe they need their bins collected and it's a matter of passing that on to a counsellor. Maybe they're losing their house or their children's lost their place at school. You get a whole matter of things that you've just got to sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis. Those are some examples. The work's fairly interesting, very different, and been so strange to do during a pandemic. I got the job as a researcher in December of 2019, and I think we had the general election during 2019, so that was, as a candidate, that was a lot of work. And then taking on a job at the same time was a lot of work. It was quite stressful. After that, we had about 3 months or 2 months until we had a pandemic, and then so those sort of months where you've tried to get on top of the job and you're just trying to make sure that you're not going to ruin everything. That's not going to reflect terribly on your MSP. All of a sudden you've got to deal with a pandemic and you're working from home. You're working from home full time and not able to get out and do things and have just easy conversations with staff about how to address something. It's been a really interesting but a really odd way of working for the past year. I'm really looking forward to getting back to some sort of normality.
So
hopefully we get that price in.
Well, that's most of your life would have been at that point. Zoom calls. Oh.
Yeah, Zoom calls they're okay. I'm so used to them now. I'm so used to seeing everyone on the screen that when we get back to seeing folk in real life, I think I'm gonna struggle with my social skills again.
It's going to be bad because
you're going to walk out with your jammies on.
I'll never wear jammies outside. Maybe to the bins, but that's it.
No, stick the one to go to Asda or something.
No, man. I'd be. A lot of my pajamas are quite they're quite colourful in that. I've got a Superman pair in that. I'm embarrassed that I'm saying that. I've got a Superman pair and there's a Star Wars pair, and I'd be so embarrassed if I was walking around with comics and stuff on.
There you go, folks. That's what you'll be voting for.
Well, this is what the voting public want to hear. Does he have Superman jammies?
Yeah.
I'm going to write down this question for every single other person. What kind of jammies do you wear?
I reckon Ryan Smart totally has Superman jammies.
I'm going to guarantee that. Right. So for now on, as a future question,
do you have Superman jammies?
What kind of jammies? I mean, it's going to be weird me just randomly asking what kind of jammies I've got. But well,
that's quite weird.
What kind of jammies do you wear? Sound like a pervert, but we'll continue on.
Right. So, for every podcast, we need to be critical at some point because most of the time it's just pissing about. So the biggest,
you've been too kind.
The biggest.
I'm still sitting writing. What kind of jammies do you wear? For no reason. I'm not going to ask that question. Of course I'll do.
So the main thing we do in this podcast, in order for me to not put my own views out there, is to go and just use the most common criticism we see. And the most common criticism I've seen of the Greens just now is the idea of splitting the vote. So the biggest examples just now are David Mundell in 2015. Apparently, if the Greens hadn't stood, the SNP could have taken that seat from Mundell. In 2016, it was Ruth Davidson. Ruth Davidson might have lost her seat. And you're standing in 12 constituencies this time, splitting the vote. What's your thoughts? Are you splitting the vote? Are you going to ruin independence for us?
No. We're not going to ruin independence. I think we're doing a lot to add to the independence debate. In terms of the electoral system, I think this is something that it dominates in a huge way with a very small amount of people online. So the fact is that our system in Holyrood is proportional. It elects constituencies and it elects list or regional MSPs. Now, often people will say, oh, it was a system set up to ensure the SNP never got majority. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it would be, and a lot fairer way, would be to say that it's proportional, so that if people vote for, if they vote for Labour and Labour get 20%, then Labour will get about 20% of the seats. So it's fair, When it comes to the Greens standing in constituencies, well, do you know we have a right, like every other party, put forward options, distinct policy options to voters. Now, we have a chance of winning our first ever constituency at Holyrood level in this election. And the plan is to keep doing that in the future. So in Glasgow Kelvin, for example, we increased our vote share by 24%. Right? Patrick Harvey has as much a chance as the SNP candidate winning that seat again, or winning that seat this time, instead of being elected on the Glasgow regional list. We are important, and people will vote for us. They will pick us if we speak most to their ambitions, and if people want to see more Greens elected, they vote Green. We're standing in 12 constituencies out of, I think, 73 in total. It's expensive standing constituencies, £500 per deposit, over 30 grand to stand in them all. We're not quite at that position as a party yet where we're able to contest every constituency. And this is up to local branches, they'll weigh up whether they want to. But the important thing for me is that we're on every list. Every single person in Scotland can vote for the Scottish Green Party on the 6th of May on the regional list. And we will elect a lot of MSPs from that list. We elected 6 on the list in 2016. This time we'd be looking to get 10 or 12, at least one for every region in Scotland. We're so close to doing so last time, and I think this time we will again. We're 0.6% off doing it in central Scotland last time. In the northeast, I think we're less than 1% off getting elected and knocking out a unionist list MSP. Like, the argument for us splitting the vote, I don't really think makes a lot of sense. There's a presumption, for example, that people who vote Green in the constituency or Green on the list, that they're SNP voters first and foremost, and they're lending their support to the Greens. Well, I just think that's nonsense. I mean, before we had anything like a discussion about independence, which prior to the referendum in 2014, let's say there was a year or two discussion about independence before that. So 2012, right? We've had Greens elected in Holyrood since 1999, since there was any possibility, since there was even the remotest dream about us getting an independence referendum to actually potentially win independence. Greens have been elected since 1999 across the country. We have scores of councillors across the country. And do you know what? Like, this time I'm voting both my votes for the Greens. Because I want to see Lorna Slater elected for North and Least, and I want to see 3 Green MSPs for Lothian. The SNP left me policy-wise many years ago. I want a left-wing party. I want a socialist party. I want a Republican pro-independence party to have seats in Scotland, in Holyrood. And that's the Scottish Greens.
There you go. Cool. You got any more questions, Craig?
Any more questions?
Right, there you go. Okay, so we have one last thing. I'm hoping that from now on, like, a lot of the politicians look back on our podcast so they could find out what happens at the end, because this could be a bit out of nowhere. So one of my biggest pet hates.
Well, there's no really going to be any more out before we finish interviewing everybody.
That's a good point. Right, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens anyway. A bit I like to do at the end, and we have done for like the past 3, just based on like the first one we done. We were talking about like pet hates, like when you go to a hustings or you do like radio or like TV stuff like that. You're given like 2 minutes to sort of give your life's knowledge and basically get a vote for your party a lot of the time. So
yeah, I'm
going to put you right in the deep end.
You now have 2 minutes. As
a bit of a practice, from now, you have 2 minutes to explain why we should vote for your party. Go.
Yeah, well, we're asking people to vote for the Scottish Greens on May the 6th because we have been such an important partner in addressing the COVID crisis this year and last year. Throughout this pandemic, Greens have won a raft of wins. We secured free school meals for all primary school children, secured free bus travel for all under 22s from this summer. We won an evictions ban for everyone renting throughout this pandemic. Like, these are huge structural things that really affect people's lives. Across the session, we've won £500 million more in public services because of our 5-band income tax model. That means those who can pay more do pay more, and those who pay less, earn less, pay less. These are huge things. These are huge wins that we've had across this Holyrood section. We want to see so much more than this done. We want people to vote like their future depends on it on May 6th. Vote Green.
Unfortunately, that was 1 minute 10.
Was that just in my head that I heard those sounds? Yeah.
Yeah. No. What happens is we tried to figure out like how many people we could actually get away with playing the knee points prick part with. So I'm going to assume there's going to be a few guests on that we won't be adding that part on the end.
Yes, we've already done 2 that we couldn't do that on.
Aye. That's it. But we thought you'd be able to handle it. I thought you'd be able to handle that.
I appreciate it. I hope I did.
Awesome.
Also, you didn't go 2 minutes, so
it was 1 minute 10 seconds, but that's all right.
It's a bit premature, but it's all good.
Well, I didn't want to milk it.
Aye, well that's it. But he done a minute before. So
there you go.
We'll add them both up.
No, I didn't do that. 'Cause I was telling the bloody anecdote for about 30 seconds in that first one.
So I said, hey, at least you gave it a try. Is that the first time you've been sort of asked? Is this the first like hustings or like interview thing you've done?
You've done hustings before.
You've done all this kind of stuff before.
I've done these things before, like for the general election in 2019.
Yeah.
This is the first podcast I've done, and it's the first thing, like any sort of media thing that I've done for this election.
Have we lost Scott there?
Have I?
Can you still hear me?
Oh yeah, you're there. Right, cool.
We lost you for a second, but you're there again.
Thanks for joining us, Scott. Much appreciated.
Aye, happy to do it, folks. Best of luck with the rest of the campaign.
Awesome, man. Thanks very much, and good luck yourself.
Right, well, I'll see you later.
No problem, man. I'll let you go. Cheerio.
Right, take care. Bye-bye.